I always like the overreactions coming out of the spring game and, this guy's going to be a star when he might be the sixth wide receiver, or the eighth running back. But it really is place to place. Like, it's always been a bigger deal at Ohio State and Penn State and Nebraska than it is at Michigan.
Our guy Adam Rittenberg covers all things college football for ESPN. He joins us on the Bryant Heating and Cooling Systems fan guest hotline. Adam, good to talk to you, my friend.
Good to be with you guys.
Jeremiah Smith came out yesterday and said he could have made $10 million in the transfer portal this year. I'm not calling him a liar. I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure the Miami Hurricanes, and among others, ready to write that big check. Do we have an idea? Do you have an idea who is the highest paid guy in college football right now from a player perspective?
It's hard to say who specifically. I'm sure I wouldn't say I'm sure, but most likely it's a quarterback, although you didn't have as many of the guys that maybe could have gone somewhere else or were really on the fence between the NFL and coming back who decided to come back. Carson Beck obviously was paid very, very handsomely last year by Miami. It could be a guy like Darian Mensah, who Miami poached from Duke, very, very late in the portal cycle to be its starting quarterback. That's a school that, as you mentioned, hasn't been shy about its ability and its desire to spend whatever it takes. But Jeremiah Smith is just such a unique player because we all know that barring, an injury or a real big production setback, he's going to be the number one overall pick in the draft next year. I mean, he's a guy that could have played in the NFL almost immediately after he got to the college level, which is pretty rare regardless of position. But, he's a guy that could help an NFL team right now. And so that's someone who is obviously of great value to Ohio State, and that's why they did whatever they needed to do to try to keep him happy and keep him a Buckeye this season.
Adam, one thing that we always sort of look at as a mile marker in the middle of summertime that tells us the college football is right around the bend. That's good old Big Ten football media days. What better, though, than when they announce when the schools are going to be participating in media days? They need 3 days for this now, spaced out through Chicago, so you don't have to travel. That's convenient for you. Can you think ahead to this of some of the coaches and players you're most wanting to hear from and some of the storylines going into the season?
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Indiana is, now having won a national championship, the talk of college football. Kurt Cignetti is always good for sound bites, and I know they're already talking about, finding a way to have a chip on their shoulder, as teams always do, even though there's no real reason to after winning a national title. So I think that's interesting. Oregon, it feels like I wouldn't say never, but certainly an elevated pressure type season for the Ducks. And to answer your earlier question, it might have been Dante Moore. He was a guy that obviously could have gone to the NFL and been a high draft pick. He comes back to the Ducks. And then talking to Dan Lanning recently, when I do these sort of roster reviews with a lot of coaches at this time of year, his was different because we're talking about guys mostly that were on the team last year. They returned their entire defensive line, a number of key offensive playmakers. They get Evan Stewart back from injury to join Jacorian Moore at wide receiver. I mean, that team is absolutely loaded, and it feels like they're next in line to be, a team that we're really talking about. USC, in talking to Lincoln Riley last month, he's very excited about his roster, which doesn't have as many transfers, a lot of returning players. So, yeah, I could go on and on. This is an exciting topic because this is the nation's top conference. There's no doubt about it, and it has a chance to continue this run of national championships, maybe with an Oregon, maybe Ohio State again, maybe Indiana repeats, maybe USC finally makes the playoffs. There are a lot of interesting possibilities, and then certainly Michigan, with Kyle Whittingham taking over, is going to be always a big storyline.
Around the Big Ten with Adam Rittenberg. So James Franklin gets fired from Penn State. He's out of work not too long, and now he's taking over for Virginia Tech. And he was talking that, he's going to make some changes behind the scenes. Now, we know why he wound up getting fired. It's because he didn't win the games he was supposed to win, didn't beat the teams he was supposed to win. But behind the scenes, his coaching style, the way he handled his staff, what was the read on James Franklin at Penn State? And what do you think he means by he's going to change things up at Virginia Tech?
Well, I think whenever, even if you feel like you were wronged in being fired when he was, it does give you time to self-reflect. And I talked with James recently, and he is such an impressive kind of CEO of a program. You talk to him, and you're like, man, why doesn't this guy win more championships? Because he is very organized. He's got great energy. You come away from those conversations thinking that this person is in charge and that they have a plan. But I think you also have to look at, why did it not ultimately reach the next level at Penn State? Could there have been different decisions made as far as staffing or how he manages the offense or how he managed games? Why wasn't Drew Aller a guy who ever really took off at quarterback? I mean, those are things, again, you can be stubborn and say, well, they just wronged me and I made the college football playoff semifinal and nearly the national championship. How could you fire me? They're wrong. Or you can look in the mirror and say, you know what? There are some areas that I have to do differently. And even though there's a lot of familiarity on that Virginia Tech staff, which, by the way, includes Brent Pry, who was their fired coach, who used to work with James Franklin at Penn State and Virginia Tech. Other assistants and players have come over, including Ethan Grunkemeyer, the quarterback transfer from Penn State. If he does it the exact same, I think that would be a mistake. You're in a different place. You've had some time to reflect. And the pressure's off to a degree because it's not Penn State. But again, if he's not competing for the ACC, it's going to look like a hire that we weren't maybe a little bit off base about, because certainly that was a celebrated hire at the time by the Hokies.
Adam, I'm always curious. We're here in spring game season. Purdue's got the next one coming up, so that'll be a banger, I'm sure, on April 11th. And then Ohio State's will be Saturday, April 18th. And depending on the weather and the year, the Buckeyes could put 90 to 100,000 fans in there for a spring game practice. With all the tinkering that's going on, though, there's been topics of, do these become, inter-squad type of scrimmages? You're trying to find revenue and make more money with your NIL budget anywhere you can, make it a bigger TV event. Are spring games what they are at this point, or could you see some change coming to those?
Well, I think what's nice about them is that they're great for fans to get at least a glimpse of their team. This is a very closed-off sport. It's not a lot of, hey, let's practice before the public and have them interact with players. I know Ohio State just had their fan day, which I think is a great event in the spring, but there really are limited opportunities to see these players. And I always like the overreactions coming out of the spring game and, this guy's going to be a star when he might be the sixth wide receiver or the eighth running back. But it really is place to place. Like, it's always been a bigger deal at Ohio State and Penn State and Nebraska than it is at Michigan. And they're just programs that Wisconsin has never been a great deal there, even though they have impressive crowds for their games. So I think that's it's either in your culture or not. Notre Dame typically hasn't had a huge spring game crowd, but they have a team that I'm going to see tomorrow practice that everyone's talking about on the national radar. So maybe they do have a larger turnout for their spring game later this month. So it's really a place-to-place thing. I don't put a lot of stock in them. I don't go to a lot of spring games, but it's great for the fans to get a glimpse of these players and the teams that they're invested in to such a high level.
We talked briefly about it yesterday, but it looks like NBC is going to pawn off their Big Ten championship game on Fox. And there's a discussion about the relevance of these conference championship games. If you look into the crystal ball, how many more years do we actually have a Big Ten championship game?
Yeah, I think it's more relevant to have the conversation in the SEC because that championship game has a lot more historical value and meaning than the Big Ten one does. I think the Big Ten would get rid of its championship game potentially tomorrow if the other conferences were doing it. This is just the way that we're going to go in college football, and we're going to essentially save a week to start the college football playoff, which obviously coaches want to do earlier. Dan Lanning has been vocal about that at Oregon, as have others, and it's been interesting to see some of the voices in the SEC, Alabama Athletic Director Greg Byrne and others, bringing up this possibility because, again, the SEC championship game has been around a lot longer. It means a lot more, not to make fun of the slogan, but it does. It's meant a lot more to their fans than the Big Ten championship, which, again, didn't exist before 2011. There's been some good games down there in Indy, and it's generally a fun time, but we all know that, barring a disaster, that the loser of that game is still going to be in the college football playoff with a chance to make a run possibly to a national championship game. So the actual value of it is not nearly what it was even a few years ago. And so I certainly think that's a way that if we're talking about ending the season earlier and getting the playoff going earlier, getting rid of conference championship games would let everything start a week earlier. And then from the fans, you don't get that championship game experience, but everyone's also trying to save some money and be at those playoff games. That's a way you can get the playoff going to start that process for the fans.
Adam, we appreciate it, my friend. We'll talk to you next week.
Okay, guys. Thank you.